Welcome back to Concrete Play. We're going to talk about health today. So, health is in every game, but you never really talk about it. Let's talk about it. If you want to use health correctly, I really recommend that you think about it as a negotiation tactic. So here's your game represented by a disc from 1978, and if your game wants to say that something is bad or dangerous, it threatens to take your health away. And if your game wants to say that something is good and nice, it gives you back health. There are literally countless examples of both of these, and it's a good way to talk to the player because the player is always going to be listening. The player always wants to know more about what's going to be affecting their health because their health is the number one thing that affects whether they can play the game. Once they're out of health, they can't play the game anymore. At least they have to go over a hurdle and reload a save or something. So health is definitely a primary factor, and it's a number one negotiation pipeline. What do I mean by a negotiation pipeline? Well, the game only has so much control over the health. Obviously, the game can just arbitrarily take health away or give health back, but where a game really shines is when it threatens to take health away. So, for example, if you're fighting some kind of goon, another one over here. So, this is fundamentally the computer going, okay, I am threatening to take away some of your health. And there are a lot of factors involved as to how much health you are likely to lose if you engage those guys. But at the end of the day, what really matters is what this causes the player to do. Is the player going to engage these dudes with his knife? Or is the player going to use some of his limited, very expensive ammunition for his super bazooka rifle thing? Well, if he has a lot of health, he'll probably use the knife, and if he has almost no health, he'll probably use the bazooka. And between those two states, it depends on the player's approach and how skillful he thinks he is, and so on. So, this is a great way to negotiate with the player. You say, I am going to take some of your health, and you can respond by doing A, B, C, or D. Sneaking around, or using another resource, or attacking head on, or whatever else happens to be available in the scope of your game. But this negotiation, it has a specific pattern to it, and this is a pattern that you can really, really adjust. So let's talk about this, because what we're talking about is making health worth more and less, depending on the sort of situations when you want the player to be more or less daring. Easy example of this is the regenerating health that games have these days. Most games have this 10-second loop where you lose health, you back off for 10 seconds, you get your health back. Now, this catches a lot of flack from us old players who are like, oh, kids these days growing up with their infinite health. But really, it's just a way of making the game's negotiations happen very, very fast. Because instead of threatening to take your health away every 5 minutes or whatever, the game can just sit there and go, okay, here's a threat, here's a threat, here's a threat, here's a threat, and the player can respond. And then, of course, the player can always respond by running away because they don't have the bandwidth to process it, and they're running out of health or whatever. But basically, it allows the player to rapidly communicate and negotiate moment to moment in a combat situation, which means you can make your combat situations very, very dense. It also means that health is worthless at the end of combat. So, at the end of any given thing of combat, you'll find that the player says, okay, I can take these guys now just without any tactics. I will just go over there and shoot at them the whole time. It doesn't matter if I got poked full of holes. And the end result is that at the end of each combat session, the player will finish it off with an exhilarating charge towards the last remaining enemy or two. And that can feel very good. And that can be the kind of feel you want for your game. You want your game to be like, oh, rah! Kill those last few guys. You are totally dominating. And there's nothing wrong with that. So using this method, what we've done is we've made the health cost less and less as the battle wears on, until at the end of the battle, health is worthless. So negotiations with the player, at the beginning of the battle, health has some value. And when you are negotiating with the player might be a little bit hesitant to lose that health. But as the battle goes on, that gets less and less valuable, and the player is more and more willing to spend health, especially once they get the pattern of the location down and they can realize how easy it is to back off and where they can hide for 5 seconds. On the other hand, if you're not regenerating health and you require the player to find something to bring back health, like a med kit or punching a demon's head off, if you do that, then you get a very different kind of game because the player has a very, very high value on their health. And you no longer have to threaten their health every 5 seconds. You couldn't do it. The player wouldn't be able to keep up. The stakes are too high. But what you can do instead is you can use a much slower negotiation about health and use some other currency for your fast negotiation. Usually that's positioning or mana or anything bullets. So by taking health down a notch, making it too expensive to really spend easily and making it too difficult to recover easily, you can really raise the price of health. And that means that when you are negotiating based on health, the player will listen. And Doom is a great example of that because it pushes the player to recover health by going in and duking it out with a monster just straight on. Similarly, some other games do this with Fallout, for example, where when you're regenerating your health because you injected a stim pack, it doesn't regenerate instantly. So the slow regeneration is actually a gameplay element. You've got to back off, hide, as well as having health cost more. Now, this is still a popular tactic in horror games because in these horror games, you want the player to feel scared, and that means that you want any kind of damage to really last. You want every point of health to be absolutely critical. There are a lot of other ways to talk about health, though. We can use this health negotiation to make our game flow however we want. For example, that quick regenerating health, that is a good way to make the end of the combat feel very rewarding. But what if we want to make the front of the combat feel rewarding? What if we want the player to go in there and get off some great shots and then back off and watch the enemy scatter in alarm? Well, that's where Halo comes into play. Halo has a health bar, and it doesn't regenerate, but it also has a shield bar that does regenerate. Because you know that you can take some damage, you can rush in against enemies. And at the very beginning of combat, you can just jump into the fray and go bang, 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 and then you back off and you regenerate. And you play it a little bit safer after that first volley. And I don't know whether that's something that high-level Halo players do, but that's something that literally everyone I ever played with did. By front-loading the health, they say these shield hit points are worth nothing. So right at the beginning, when you're full on shields, you're like, health is worthless. I'll just go out there and spend it. But when your shield gets low and you start to pull back, then you're like, okay, health is starting to get a little bit pricey. We should think twice. We should back off a little bit. And that gave Halo its unique, aggressive feel. And it was the reason I think that Halo was so popular, because it certainly wasn't the level design. This actually buys into the whole Halo philosophy if you read up on that some more, so that might be worth reading into if you want to know more about why that really worked. But in the end, it's because that first few seconds, you could spend health and you didn't care. You were allowed to spend as much health as you wanted to cause damage right up front, and only then would the price start to go up. How about Butcher Bay? I don't know if all of you have played Butcher Bay, but it's a kind of a first-person sneak shooter thingy featuring Riddick, who at the time was one of the cool guys, and then of course the rest of his movies came out and turned out to be kind of stupid. But at the time Butcher Bay came out, he was doing well, and Butcher Bay was a great game. Now, even without a health system that played to its strengths, Butcher Bay probably would have been pretty good, but the health system took it to the true height of its power. And the reason is because it had a very lumpy pricing system. So when Riddick was wandering around in the dark, looking at bad guys and sneaking up on them and thinking about whether or not to shoot them, you had a lot of options as to how to approach any given bad guy. And this health system, the way it works, is that if you take damage, it's fine because you'll regenerate it as long as you don't take a full bar. But if you take a full bar, and then some more, this part will regenerate, but this stays down. And so what that means is that the first chunk of your health is always cheap, but that next section is super expensive. Not like the shield, where 50% of your health bar is free and 50% of your health bar is super expensive. This was like the first 15% is free, and then the next 10% is expensive, and then the first 15% after that is free, and the next 10% is expensive. It was really quite well done. And what it ended up meaning is that if there was one guy over here looking around for you, you could actually take him on without much trouble. You know, he's like, I'm going to come and get you. I pointed him the wrong way. But he's like, I'm going to come and get you. If anyone comes by this corner, I'm going to shoot them or whatever. And you could deal with that because you have health that can regenerate. So you're like, I can take one guy, shoot me once or twice. It won't knock off a full bar of health. I'm fine. I can just go in there and take him out. But if there were 3 guys, you'd have to be like, okay, that's going to cost me more than half a bar of health. I had better find some way to get these guys alone or avoid them or find explosives or something, because I can't take on those 3 guys. I'll lose more than 1 bar of health, and that will result in some semi-permanent injury I don't want to take. And this was also true of the hazards in Butcher Bay. So if you were running into some place that was dangerous and could injure you, you could run through that damaging area for some length of time without losing any permanent health. But if you lingered, you would lose permanent health. So it was a really interesting setup that worked extremely well to create the kind of play that they wanted. And that kind of play was Riddick can kill any one guy. Period. But Riddick cannot take on groups. And so the whole game was largely about, okay, there's a group, I'm in deep trouble. It gave Riddick this really gritty feel while still leaving him feeling very, very strong. It worked very well. And the whole reason it worked is because of this system where some of your health is expensive some of the time, some of your health is cheap some of the time, and you can do this. You can just go ahead and make your health work like this so that you can have any kind of approach you want. If you want to make it so that you fight hard, the players jump into fights right at the beginning, you give them some free health at the beginning. You want to make it so that they fight hard at the end for a big finale, you give them free health at the end. You want to make it so that every step really, really alarms them, then you give them no free health and every single threat is serious. And you can do anything in between. There are also a lot of other ideas as to how you can do this. It really does depend on what you need to do. One popular tactic, in RPGs at least, is to give you multiple health bars. And I don't mean like you run out of one and you move on to the other. I mean things like this one's health, this one's mana, and this one's fatigue, and so on. Now this works okay. It's especially complicated when you start to have more and more characters and their healths all have different values. So it can get very complicated, but you can still balance it in the way you want. A fighter's health is far, far cheaper than a mage's health because a fighter has more health and probably has some regenerative abilities. On the other hand, a mage's mana is more expensive than a fighter's mana because who the hell cares about a fighter's mana? So you can play with this to make your parties have the right feel. And your fighter is going to go out there and it's going to take a beating because that's the whole point. His health is built specifically to popularize him taking a beating. The player who is playing this will automatically know that that health is worth less than the mage's health or the thief's health, and therefore should be the health that gets sacrificed until some tipping point where the fighter is too damaged. So this allows you to negotiate with the player, and you can build these webs of negotiation. And when you've got an RPG and something like that, and you've got a lot of different healths, it's all about weighing which health gets spent when. When do the prices of the healths start to offset each other? When do you burn mana instead of health? When do you burn fatigue instead of mana? When do you burn person A's health versus person B's mana? By intrinsically weighting the prices of those, by giving more or less of them to any given character, you can really change how the game plays. And you can also change how it plays based on how much damage and how much recovery and all sorts of stuff like that. Think about it. Try very hard to come up with how you want your game to be played, and use your health to negotiate with the player so that they play that way. Anyway, that is my concrete play for today. I'm using a new mic setup, so let me know what you think of the audio quality. And if you have any suggestions about things you want me to cover in concrete play, feel free to drop me a line below or email me or whatever.